So with that, Dimitri, go ahead. You can take it from here.
Thank you very much. Pleasure to be here today. Welcome, everybody, and thank you for having me. So just one caveat to start, this really is past my bedtime. I just had a cup of coffee, though, and I promise to stay uppity as much as possible and keep this engaged and lighthearted, even though we will be talking about threshold cryptography at a certain point. So one of the things in my life that I absolutely dread is talking about myself. Even if it's just the facts concerning my background. But here goes. So I am what I refer to as a recovering attorney. I spent about 15 years of my professional career working for a national law firm representing financial institutions, mostly in regulatory and enforcement matters. To take it a step back from there, I've always loved computer science. Took my first coding course back in the mid 80s in junior high school. Luckily, my school, even though it was an inner city school, we had Apple machines, believe it or not, back then. And I absolutely adored what I was able to code. At the time, it was BASIC. And to tell you how long ago this was, I actually took, at the time, some courses in Pascal and Fortran, right? So talk about, antiquated languages. It's like, Sanskrit, if you will, in the spoken language. But always loved computer science, always stayed with me, as a passion. Obviously, I lost my way after college, decided to get a law degree and a master's degree. But I luckily was able to right the wrong, navigate that ship back on course. And about 6 or 7 years ago, became enamored with Bitcoin and the Bitcoin blockchain. And that's really what drove me to focus, or refocus, I should say, on technology. And in particular, started really considering the nuances and the technological aspects of the Bitcoin blockchain technology, and really what it meant, not only for advancements in distributed systems, but from my standpoint, the security aspect of it, right? If you really think about it, you have an incredible amount of wealth really being controlled by mathematics, which is the way it should be, right? When people ask me to talk about Bitcoin and the Bitcoin blockchain, I explain to them that really the innovation is mostly around disintermediating the intermediaries. And what that means is, most of us on this call are quite content, likely, using intermediaries like the big banks, right? When we use our debit card to buy a Starbucks coffee, Starbucks doesn't look at us and consider, hey, what's the counterparty risk here, right? And we don't think about it, conversely in any way other than, we have a debit card and, my bank is going to deduct a set amount of money from my bank account in order for me to be able to pay for this coffee. But Bitcoin really does away with that central party. And when my co-founder and I were in that Bitcoin universe way back when it was, very sort of on the cutting edge, we said to ourselves, it's really interesting. This public-private key pairing thing really is there in a very profound way, and is able to secure, at the time it was billions of dollars. Now it's, a trillion. And we said to ourselves, well, why can't we do that with passwords? And that's really what resulted in the company that we ended up co-founding. And we said to ourselves, well, why can't we use, public-private key pairing for security purposes? And that's really what led me to go down this path and really found a company that provides a information security solution around encryption. It's been an incredible journey. I'm thrilled to be, in the computer science world back again, which is really my first love when it comes to anything academic. And at the end of the day, the cybersecurity solution that we built is incredibly innovative. To be clear, it has nothing to do with blockchain technology, but it was certainly inspired by blockchain technology. And it really is, at its core, what will allow me today to speak to you about the importance of a distributed system, a true distributed system that does not rely on traditional underpinnings around cybersecurity. And with that, why don't I just jump in here, share my screen, and begin presenting what you all came to see here today. So I hope everyone sees my screen. Okay, I'll assume everything's working properly. So
Fine.
thank you. So what are we talking about today? Identity and access management control, right? It's a terrific tool that we all utilize, right? Security professionals utilize on a daily basis. And it's a necessary tool for cybersecurity. But at the end of the day, identity and access management controls are not good for information security. And before jumping in and really talking about the differences and what makes, what allows me to make such a profound statement, let's take a quick look at some of the definitions around cybersecurity. And this is important because sometimes we don't focus on what it is that cybersecurity really is defined as, right? What we should expect from cybersecurity, what tools are out there with respect to cybersecurity solutions. But just quickly, I'm not going to read all of these, but it's the art of protecting networks, devices, data from unauthorized access or criminal use, prevention of damage to, protection of, restoration of computers, electronic communication systems, electronic communication services, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Measures taken to protect a computer or computer system against unauthorized access or attack. And really the way I view cybersecurity is really the perimeter, right? How do we prevent the bad guys, the adversaries, from gaining access to our internal system, keep the bad guys out, right? Detecting them, isolating them, just making sure that they don't gain access, right? Now that's really different from information security. And I think, a lot of the times people throw these terms around interchangeably. And in my view, information security really is a subset of cybersecurity, right? Cybersecurity being the umbrella, and then information security being the sliver under that umbrella, right? And what are some of the definitions of information security, right? Protect and defend information, protect information, right? That's like the repeating theme here, right? It's protecting the underlying data, right? And that's really the important distinction between cybersecurity and information security, right? Cybersecurity protecting the perimeter, information security protecting what's within that perimeter, right? The information that is being safeguarded. Think of it as Fort Knox, right? And the gold bullion within Fort Knox, right? So as I said, well, what's the difference, right? Broadly speaking, cybersecurity protects the perimeter, information security singularly focused on protecting data. However, in my experience, what I see over and over and over again is security practitioners not making a distinction between the two. And that's unfortunate because it's very important to understand which tools protect the perimeter and which tools are available and how best to use those tools with respect to the data within that perimeter, right? So who cares? Why should we care, right? And this really goes to just a broad statement as it concerns cybersecurity. And again, I don't care how good your policies and procedures may be. I don't care how good your processes are to ensure that those policies and procedures are being followed. As we all know, the weakest link always is the human element, right? And I could have thrown some statistics in here, but we all know that, today what we witness, no matter, how good the training is, right? That human person, that individual, whether they intend to or not, will make mistakes. And when they click on that link and introduce an adversary into the environment unknowingly, that today, is the predominant form of attack. It's that social engineering. And whether it's a phishing attack or some, brute force attack or some other attack, it is usually the human element which allows the adversary to make their way in, right? I think the percentages are somewhere like, in today's attacks, somewhere like north of 80% of attacks are socially engineered attacks, right? So it's always going to be the human element. And there's nothing that we as security professionals can do to stop that, right? short of stopping them from actually accessing the computers and the systems. So what can we do about it, right? It's really a mindset. It's really a security posture that is really important to ensuring that you have a successful cybersecurity program that also really addresses and doesn't disregard or doesn't diminish the importance of information security, right? And so, what we promote often and what we always discuss is properly segregating cybersecurity from information security. And this, again, is a very profound statement, right? Organizations that continue to associate, access controls with information security will eventually suffer devastating results. Why? Because if you allow the entirety of your cybersecurity tech stack to hinge on one or two core pillars, one of those pillars will inevitably be compromised. And by allowing one of those pillars to be compromised, chances are, it's really becomes a domino effect. And everything connected to those controls likely will fail, right? So in that context, I think it's really important to talk about encryption. Why encryption? Encryption is really an incredible innovation as concerning information security. Encryption was designed for one purpose. It was to prevent an unauthorized third party from being able to access anything that you've encrypted, right? So it's really one of those for your eyes only. And encryption has evolved over millennia, right? Encryption's been used in some form or another for literally thousands of years. Fast forward to, I would say, the past, 40 or 50 years, encryption has really been fine-tuned, and encryption has really been, a core to information security and the success of an information security program. In the commercial context, however, encryption has really been not used to its full core potential. And what do I mean by that? Encryption is kind of complex, right, for a regular user to understand, to even want to know about. And a lot of solutions out there, generally speaking, to solve that UX UI of encryption, connect encryption to identity and access management controls. And that does wonders from a UX UI standpoint, right? To allow those, regular users to be able to interact with their files without even knowing what's happening on the back end, without understanding that when they enter their username and password or their 2FA or multi-factor or SSO, what they're actually doing is being able to access information that was encrypted up until that point. So what's great for the UX UI, the usability side of encryption, really diminishes the strength of encryption, the resiliency of encryption, the value proposition, the guarantees that encryption brings to the security side of that equation. And reliance on identity and access management controls is dangerous, because if you think of something for, a social engineering attack, right? And when a user's credentials are compromised, pretty much everything that the authorized user has access to is now available to that adversary, because when you connect encryption to identity and access management controls, you're literally decrypting everything wholesale. The instant someone enters their credentials successfully, including an adversary, your systems are now working against you, because the systems now recognize that adversary as an authorized party. And everything that that authorized party has access to is available wholesale. That's a problem, right? So that's one of the issues with legacy encryption that's connected to identity and access management controls. Another issue, central key stores, right? And there have been tremendous advances with central key storage mechanisms. Again, the problem with central key stores is in the name, it's centralized. And anything that's centralized can suffer some form of attack. Even if you think about something like, PGP, right? If I were able to access the server, somehow, attack that server and change my private key with someone else's private key, and that person now is out there, I could pretend to be signing messages as someone else, right? And that is one of the failings of a centralized key server, right? Not to mention the fact that, again, central key storage solutions also suffer from identity and access management failings, right? From the standpoint of once I'm an authorized user, there's a central store. It looks at, whether it's looking at a cert on my computer or looking at my credentials and seeing that it's a valid credential entry, that server is going to spit out those keys so that I can go ahead and decrypt whatever it is I'm trying to decrypt and access. So again, central key stores, another failing. Another problem with encryption, full disk, full volume, right? Definitely necessary, right? If I leave my laptop behind at an airport, right, at the gate, I certainly don't want someone to be able to, pop open the back of my computer, pull out that hard drive, and gain access to my my information, right? So there's definitely a purpose with full disk and full volume encryption. And I would say that, maybe 10 years ago, 15 years ago, there was a bigger risk of, theft of hard drives, of physical devices. So definitely still serves a purpose, but it's really not, if you look at the attack vectors these days and the types of attacks that are being perpetrated, it's really not hardware theft, right? And again, the full disk, full volume encryption, once I log in, I enter my credentials, again, everything is wholesale available to me. So, these encryption solutions that a lot of folks continue to use, I really describe as more check the box type of encryption solutions. It's sometimes so that they can answer the question of, are you encrypting? Yes, I am, affirmatively. But is that encryption really worth anything? Is that encryption really a redundancy? Is that encryption above and beyond your access rights management? And more often than not, the answer is no. So another way encryption works is with passwords, right? Now, let's imagine an organization, and the organization has, let's say, a few hundred employees, and magically, all of those employees have incredible memories. And the organization says, you know what, we're going to password protect all these files that we have here, and we're gonna all memorize the password, and we're not going to write down the password anywhere. Well, in theory, in this magical place, that would actually prevent an intruder, right? An intruder accessing a file store would be unable to access anything because it's password protected, and unless they were able to somehow trick a employee into releasing a password, well, guess what? They tricked the employee into releasing a password for one file, but all those other thousands of files have their own password, right? So pretty darn secure. But that's fantasy land, right? As a practical matter, it just wouldn't work. Or if you're encrypting certain files with a password, again, now how do you share that password? How do you distribute it among users so that multiple users can share that encrypted file, that password protected file? So while definitely, in theory it could work, as a practical matter, it wouldn't. And beyond that, there's really no recourse if that password is ever lost, right? If that password is lost, you're done, right? Especially with, if you're using AES-256, which most encryption algorithms they utilize, there's no real way to gain access to an AES-256, bit encrypted piece of data. So legacy encryption, and again, I'm generalizing here. I'm kind of talking about, the various, the core tools that folks are using these days. They fail. They fail when your IAM controls fail. And that's unfortunate because, again, tying your information security mechanisms to your cybersecurity mechanisms, if the cybersecurity mechanism fails, then your information security mechanism fails. And it shouldn't be that way, right? The information security aspect of it should be there. So what can be done about that? Well, and I mentioned we were going to talk about threshold cryptography, and I promise not to go too deep unless anyone really wants to go too deep. So what is threshold cryptography, and what could it do for us? Well, if you take an encryption key, and if you think of the example I gave of the passwords, right? You could do technically that. You can actually password protect each and every file, that password being a unique AES-256-bit encryption key. And you can split that key among physical devices, right? This goes back to what I started with, right? The Bitcoin blockchain. That's really what that is, right? And instead of remembering something, you can hold those keys on something you own. And I would argue that something you own, for example, your smartphone and your computer, is better than something you can remember, because something you can remember can be forgotten. Something you remember can be stolen. Something you remember can be inadvertently shared. But, we walk around with these supercomputers in the palms of our hands, and we all know that we're not utilizing these tools to their full potentials. More often than not, we're using them, for productive apps, but those are in fact supercomputers in the palms of our hands. And why not use those as key shard holders, right? To be able to actually access files that are encrypted with their own unique keys. And the benefit of doing so is, from a mathematical standpoint, right? From a cryptology, fundamental standpoint, you can distribute those shards ad infinitum. And that's really something that allows encryption, going back to that formula of, security versus usability. You can actually keep that formula in parity, right? You don't have to compromise security and you don't have to compromise usability. I'll talk about that in a second. And anyone on this call today, if you're familiar with Shamir's secret sharing scheme, academics have written about threshold cryptography for quite some time. And I think it really is the advent of the smartphone, the mobile device, that at least for us allowed us to bring the invention to life with an actual practical product. So how does threshold cryptography work? So you would create a file on your machine, and the host computer, right, the endpoint, if you will, is running software. That software generates an AES key, and we can talk about how it's generating that key to avoid any type of issues around the key generation aspect of it. The file gets encrypted with its own unique AES 256-bit key. The software then takes that key and cuts it up into component pieces, key shards. And the software distributes those key shards to every user who A, has access to the location, and B, has the software running on their computers, right? The software knows where to send those key shards, right? And it knows how to do so primarily because, right, mathematically it knows how many endpoints are running the particular software, right? And it's doing so in a way where even if, a malicious bad actor somehow jumped in there and tried to create their own profile, you could prevent the distribution of key shards to that adversary by virtue of the fact that there's a verification process with respect to who it is that is part of, if you will, a security group, right? And I'll talk about that in a second to really bring it to life. So I do have to, at this point, talk about why this is possible, right? From a threshold standpoint, this, takes us back to some high school math, right? So we see our Cartesian plane. And this is really the beauty of threshold cryptography. Here in front of you, you see a line, right? And as we know, a line can have an infinite number of points on it, right? But you only need 2 points in order to know where that line intersects the XY axis. And by doing so, right, if you think about the intercept point as the password, right, the AES key, you can have these different points, and this is really representative of those key shards and why you're able to distribute those key shards among multiple users and why those multiple users are able to access a file, right, that is encrypted with its own unique key and without compromising any security in that construct. So here, right, you can use any combination of the 3 points, right? AB, AC, BC, right? Now multiply that across 1,000 people. And again, you're not breaking this formula because it's mathematically sound, but you do offer the ability to create a seamless UX UI by virtue of the fact that you only need a minimum of 2 pieces, but you can increase that number. Again, talking about threshold cryptography. And what's interesting is here we're looking at a line. Now, if you think about a parabola, it's a bit more complicated, but this is more representative. And in fact, a parabola, you need 3 points. Not without, I don't want to muddy this discussion too much and get really nitty gritty, but this really is the underpinnings of what a threshold cryptography encryption solution looks like. This is the foundation of it, right? So just, to bring it all together, right? So if we really can create that secret among a group of participants. Again, going back to that Cartesian plane and that line, the intercept, where it intercepts the XY axis, that's the AES-256-bit key. And every point there on that line represents a shard. You need a minimum of 2 in order to know where it intercepts, right? So, and again, the beauty of this is we can add as many participants as possible as long as we know that they have at least 2 points on that line, right? And that's really the benefit there. So again, I kind of mentioned this, but by doing, by creating that threshold, right, a minimum of 2, with mathematics, again, you can increase that minimum, right? You can increase it to any M of N combination. And that could actually come into play. In fact, with the government, for example, right? They like to have, multiple checks and balances and don't really like to give certain people, authority over certain things. And those checks and balances, in fact, could be, like the nuclear key code, right? Where you need 2 people to turn the keys simultaneously in order to activate the codes and launch the missiles. It's similar in concept. You can create an M of N combination where instead of 2 key shards, you would need a multiple, number, that's higher than 2. And sort of the example I like to use is, if you think about the secret formula of Coca-Cola, you can have 7 of the 11 board members have to approve a request to decrypt because you need minimum of 7 of 11 key shards in order to reconstitute the decryption key and decrypt the file, right? So to bring it to life, what does it look like, right, from an end user standpoint, right? They create the file, right? This is basically what I was just discussing, but I think visualizing it will bring it to life, right? So you have a file, right? You create a file on your workstation. The software takes that file and encrypts it, right? It encrypts it with its own unique AES-256-bit key, right? And now the file is encrypted. Now the software needs to do something with those key shards in order to provide the ability for users to be able to access the information, right? And it distributes those key shards to users, again, who have access to the location and are provisioned with the software, right? Really important, right? They have to have the software running in order to be able to, reconstitute the key shards, and they have to have access to the location. Pretty simple. When a user accesses the information, the software realizes on the endpoint, hey, I don't have a sufficient number of key shards in order to decrypt this. I need a key shard. The user receives a prompt on their phone. They tap their phone. Key shard is sent back. Key is reconstituted. File is decrypted, right? That's really the UX UI of the system, right? The threshold cryptographic system. That's what allows it to function and not break any existing workflows, not create any type of friction, not create new workflows for the user. It's really very much looks and feels like a 2FA or an SSO if you think about it. So what are the benefits here, right? What have we done? If you notice during my entire sort of walkthrough of what this system looks like, nowhere did we talk about identity and access management. True, the user has to authenticate their credentials in order to be able to access the location, right? But unless an adversary is able to compromise not only the user's workstation, but also their secondary device, the adversary will be unable to access anything that's encrypted with the threshold cryptographic system. Because again, it goes back to the need for devices that you control, right? Way superior to anything that right? That password that we discussed. And having those 2 devices as the quote authenticating devices is really what allows a user to be able to interact with their files as they normally would, but prevent that adversary, even if they've compromised that perimeter, from being able to access anything that's encrypted with that threshold system. So a couple of points that you benefit from when you disconnect from those IAM controls, right? Instead of bulk decrypting, you're decrypting one file at a time. And because each file has its own unique encryption key, let's even assume that an adversary was somehow lurking on the endpoint when that particular user had decrypted a file. Well, yeah, the adversary would be able to gain access to that one file. The key would be in memory. But that doesn't allow the adversary in any way to recreate keys for any of the other files, right? Because again, it's an AES 256-bit key, so they've really, not been able to glean anything beyond the one file that's been decrypted. The encrypted version of the file is what resides in the backend storage location. Why is that important? Well, again, because if someone's credentials are compromised and someone jumps into that, whether it's a network share or cloud share environment, they're unable to access anything. They can exfiltrate the files, but it's the ciphertext encrypted AES 256-bit version of the file, which is pretty much rendered useless to the attacker in that context. The only time a file is decrypted, locally on the endpoint, right? Again, very, very secure from that standpoint. The only thing that you've really opened up is that one file. Sensitive data remains encrypted always, right? So if again, going back to that, credential loss scenario, right? The information is siloed. It doesn't hinge on, it's not connected to the IAM controls from an access standpoint. So super secure. And it really addresses a lot of the attacks that we're seeing these days, which are the file exfiltration attacks, the extortionware that we're seeing, because again, the only thing that the adversary, going back to that Fort Knox example, they think they've gotten the gold bullion, but when they start looking at it, it's really lead, and there's not much they can do with it. So it's an incredible way of maximizing security using existing solutions, existing technology. And, again, going back to the whole sort of security posture and the way companies will succeed in stymieing attacks, preventing attacks, mitigating attacks, is really focusing on the fundamentals. And the fundamentals can't be just looking at the perimeter and relying on the sanctity of the perimeter, the integrity of the perimeter to protect your data. We speak to security practitioners daily, right? And some of them, unfortunately, have been hit by ransomware attacks, and more often than not, what we hear is, we were lucky. We were lucky because fill in the blank, right? They were unable to get here, or we were lucky because our backups happened to be in this weird, place that they weren't, not by design, but because something happened, and it's really one of those situations of there, but for the grace of God. And it's not until folks actually get whacked that we really see, the focus, the eyes, the light bulb go off, where they really appreciate the need to bifurcate their cybersecurity stack from their information stack and not really rely on that information technology solution, to be part and parcel with the cybersecurity solution. So, I can go into a little bit more if anyone wants about how the key sharding mechanism works for threshold cryptography. I think I can stop right there and see if there's any questions and make this a little bit more interactive at this point.
Hey, Dimitri, it looks like we have a question from Glenn that popped up, and he says, is there a passphrase to access your device to click, for instance, okay, send my shard?
Yeah, so, look, so our solution, that's exactly how it works, right? You have to, as the user, right, and that human interaction is really what separates the difference between something that is automated, right? Think of a central key store, right? That central key store looks at a cert. If the cert is valid, it'll release the keys. From our standpoint, that human interaction, the need for someone to tap something on their phone, to approve something on their phone in order to release the key shard, is really what brings a level of security that up until now really has not existed in a general sense, in a commercial context, for encryption, right? And that's because, firstly, smartphones, and the computing power of smartphones has really become so advanced that the smartphones can undertake what's necessary in order to be able to not only hold the key shards, encrypt the key shards, send back the key shards, and do so in a manner where, there's no delay, right? There's no latency for the user. So it's absolutely a requirement to have the user have to tap approve on their phone. And so with our solution in particular, depending on the organization and what their policies are, you can require the user to have to tap approve for every single file that they open up. or you can launch a session window. And the session window is really a productivity hack, where during that session, you can maximize the number of files that can be opened without the user having to affirmatively tap their phone for for a number of hours or whatever the organization feels comfortable. The app is there. You would see the countdown clock, right, ticking down, and that's important, right, because unless the user is sitting there blindly tapping approve, at least with our solution, any read-write access with respect to any file that's encrypted with our software can't be accessed until the user actually does something with that secondary device.
That makes sense. And I had a question just with regards to splitting keys. Doesn't that really create like key management overhead issues, as far as like having multiple shards and just having to manage the different keys? How is that?
That's a great question. Yeah. And that's really where the software shines, right? Like at the end of the day, if you look at key management solutions, right? Like Microsoft has a KMS, Amazon has it if you're using their solution, right? A lot of companies, allow you to quote, bring your own keys. But key management is incredibly complex. It's almost a full-time job. If you're not managing it right, things will break. And it's a hell of a complex, right? And that's really what it boils down to. So with our solution with threshold cryptography, because you're relying on the math aspect of it, everything happens seamlessly behind the scenes. And it does, and that's important, right? Because if you had a central admin monitoring the keys and administering the keys, well, again, anything centralized can be attacked. Anything centralized can be attacked. Anything automated can be attacked. Here, the only thing that the system is doing from an automated standpoint is distributing key shards to disparate devices. And by having the disparate devices be the necessity for decryption, right, that's what really brings the security to the fore here. So it seems complex. It seems like there's overhead. It seems like, oh man, this is just another key management solution, but it's actually the opposite. It's the only automated thing that this solution does is the distribution of keys, and that happens behind the scenes. And because each file is encrypted with its own unique key, you don't have to do things like key revocation, key expiration, recycling keys, things of that nature. So from that standpoint, that's where the software has to do its thing. Because if it's just another, key management system, no good, because those key management systems can be attacked, and they can oftentimes also, break, quote unquote, because if they're not administered properly, you can cause yourself a lot of headaches with those systems.
Sounds good. And the other question I like to ask all of our speakers is there a book that you'd recommend on the topic of encryption? Just a book that you've read that you think is awesome, that speaks broadly to, the various technical aspects of encryption?
The answer is yes. And I'll pull up the name in a second. I literally have it on my desk. I turn to it all the time. It's definitely got cryptography in the name. If you give me a second while we talk, I'll pull it up. But it's basically used so much. It's sunburned. I'll look it up right now.
I read a number of them myself, and just as I was getting into it long ago, I read Crypto by Levy, and that's sort of like the full history of crypto from way back in the day in the NSA. It's a pretty fascinating, easy read. I like that one a lot. That's like, if someone's like, hey, I don't understand encryption at all, I'd say start with that one and you'll learn an awful lot just from reading it, and it's very easy to grasp. It doesn't require a lot of heavy math.
Yeah, and that's important, right? Because I think sometimes with when you talk about encryption, people just sort of eyes glaze over and they're like, I don't want. Okay, so the book I'm talking about is actually called Serious Cryptography: A Practical Introduction to Modern Encryption. And it's by Jean-Philippe Amusson, Aumasson. It's quite good. It's probably, a few years old by now, but it's still like the concepts and, the discussions in there are on point, and it's very good. It's a good guide, and, the sections are quite good, right? So you don't have to read the entirety of the book. If you're interested in a certain type of encryption or a certain aspect of encryption, you can just go to the particular section and just focus on that.
And do you have any thoughts in general about random number generation? That's a topic that comes up a lot, and I know a lot of people have various political, religious beliefs of oh, it has to be hardware-based, software-based. Pseudo-random number generation is useless. There's both camps, and I just wondered, personally, what do you think is best?
I wouldn't answer that in absolutes and kind of say what's best and what isn't. I think you have to look at it in context of what you're hoping to accomplish. I would argue that, certain random number generators on your hardware, on your computer, your Windows, keyring generator are absolutely sufficient for what it is. In other contexts, probably not. And in fact, if you look at some of the attack vectors, that is in fact some of the places that you can, attack a cryptographic system, is at the key generation point, right? It's similar to and again, in my mind, I try to simplify things when it comes to computer science. What is encryption? Encryption is a password. Encryption is a password that I want to share with someone without disclosing what the password is, right? In essence, that's what it is. And if you fail in the key generation process, that's really somewhere where the intruder can actually, attack your systems. Now, that being said, putting this in context of our solution as an example, what can an attacker do? Can they somehow attack the key generation in process on anyone's machine with respect to that one file? Do I really care? Is that really the attack that they're going to perpetrate? Probably not. But I think, if you're generating the key for purposes of, encrypting a thing as opposed to encrypting something systematically, that's where the danger comes in, right? And I think that's where a lot of people, talk about, key revocation and key rotation and things of that nature. In a way, it's similar to some of these password policies. And some people are probably saying, what are you talking about? Why are you talking about password policies? I always scratch my head when, I see a policy that says, well, we require users to change their password every 30 days. And I say, why? What's happened? Has the password been compromised? Is there a chance that on day 31, the adversary is somehow going to be able to, attack that password that they weren't able to on day 30? I never understood that concept. And I don't think I actually think the whole notion that the process of changing a password is dangerous and creates an attack vector. Whereas with the key generation, if you think about that, it's the same concept. It's sort of like, where are they going to attack me and what are they going to do? So, it's a combination. There's actually, I think in the book that I just described, I think it begins with the random generator and where the attack can happen. Definitely there are some sophisticated attacks around key generation, with pulses and, the hertz at which, certain things are running. I think there's an Israeli company that put together a tool that actually can compromise the keys that are being generated. So that answer, I would say, really depends on context and what you're hoping to accomplish. So I hope that answered that question, but I kind of meandered. I apologize.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And thanks for the book advice. I'll probably pick that up. So I just had another question sent to me in text, and this is, how are multiple authorized users able to access encrypted files from a shared storage location? And the add-on to that, is there any delay from the user experience?
So there's no delay, so the way our software runs, it's basically, if you're using a virtual machine and the virtual machine has really, inadequate, processors and, the power's not there, yeah, you'll experience a delay, but it's not, anything meaningful. With respect to a regular machine, as long as it's, 1 or 2 generations old, you'll have no problems whatsoever because the CPU usage is just whatever power it takes to literally, decrypt an AES 256-bit key. Unless you're opening, 50 files and decrypting those, yeah, that may delay things, just like opening 50 files will delay things, right? Because your CPU would have to open 50 files, but it's not meaningful to an end user. With respect to how multiple users are able to access the files, it's because what happens is, and actually you guys can still see my screen, right? So it's apropos here. So what's happening really is every user has their own public-private key pairing. And that public-private key pairing is important because the key shards that are being distributed to each user are encrypted with the public key of that particular user. And by doing so, the software knows where to send that push notification, because if I'm the user opening up the file, it sees, oh, okay, I need this pairing. It sends it to the appropriate secondary device. And each key shard is in turn also encrypted using elliptic curve cryptography. And that's important from a security standpoint to ensure that that shard can't be compromised. But ultimately, because every user has their own shard, and again, going back to that Cartesian plane and that line, and where that line intersects the XY axis, right? You only need 2 points to know where it intersects, but you can have an infinite number of points on that chart. And so if you think of 2 points on that chart, 2 paired points on that chart, if you will, an AB example, my AB is are my key shards. My colleagues is BC, my other colleagues is, CD, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And you can do that ad infinitum. And that, therefore, because everyone has their own key pairing, right? And because the file itself has that one AES-256-bit key, but requires, a minimum of 2 key shards on that line in order to decrypt. Because everyone has their own key shards, everyone's able to decrypt the same file, access it as they normally would, edit it, close it back up, it syncs. If it's in the cloud, if it's on network, the user just accesses it as they normally would.
Okay, and I had another question sent to me in text, and this is also what happens when a new user needs access to already encrypted files?
Yeah, and that's great because also going back to mathematics, you would literally take an existing key shard and split an existing key shard, right? Think about that, right? How do you split an existing key shard? Well, the mathematics around that are phenomenal, and that's exactly how you allow a new user, right? So if you look at the screen, you see, let's assume my pairing, right? The A-B pairing that we were talking about. What I would do is, right, let's say I'm the admin, or I'm a colleague of this new user. My key shards would be split up into, a capital A subset B, capital B subset C, whatever the case may be. From a mathematical standpoint, I can do that again and again and again and again and again. And the new user, because they received a subset of my key shards, they're able to, again, going back to that Cartesian plane, access that the AES-256-bit key, because those subsets of the key shards that I redistributed to my colleague, let's say, allows them to gain access to the encrypted file without in any way, again, creating any type of attack vector or any insecurity in the system, because you can literally shard an existing key shard through infinity. And that's the beauty about cryptography, right? It's so mathematically sound that as long as the math behind it works, you're not going to be able to attack the system, right? And it's way stronger than relying on username and password and a multi-factor authentication.
Can you talk just a bit about the elliptic curve? It's been quite a while since I last had someone explain it to me, but my understanding was that if you had one point on the curve, you would be able to calculate the other point. You'd be able to beat the encryption if you had that one point already. Is that true, or?
So if you look at the Bitcoin blockchain, they use ECC, elliptic curve cryptography, and so the NSA has a curve, which is what we use, but we like the Bitcoin curve, and here's why. If it was broken, then the Bitcoin blockchain would be broken. And I think if you think about a bug bounty as an example, that's a pretty darn big bug bounty, right? It's about whatever it is, high of $1 trillion. And it has not been broken, and that's because, with elliptic curves, you actually need 3 points in order to know what the PKI is. And it depends on how you're utilizing that elliptic curve. And the Bitcoin blockchain utilizes an elliptic curve in combination with public-private key pairing, right? So that's another thing that's important with cryptography. You can encrypt encrypted information. You can use various curves. You can use asymmetric and symmetric cryptography. And that's actually important, right? If you take a symmetric key, right, which is exactly what we do, right? And we take a symmetric AES 256-bit key. We then use asymmetric cryptography to cut it up into key shards, right? So you've taken a symmetric key, used asymmetric cryptography to cut it up, and then you're using elliptic curve cryptography on top of that to lock up the key shards themselves. So, it's security over security over security. And if you layer it that way, the ability for someone, even the NSA, right? Let's assume the NSA had a 256-bit backdoor. Not saying anything, right? But let's assume they did, right? With our software, they still would be unable to access the encrypted file. And that's because even if they had, the ability to decrypt an AES-256-bit key, the file itself doesn't have the entirety of the key there. It only has a portion of the key. The other portion is on another device. So even if, they were able to decipher half the key, it's still not sufficient because of the threshold minimum to be able to decrypt it. So, elliptic curves are, if anyone's familiar with NIST standards, what's interesting is the government has not come out with a NIST standard elliptic curve. And that's why, even though we use a NSA approved curve, we still are big fans of the Bitcoin curve because, again, because of the value it is securing.
Okay, so we just got a question up on the Q&A, and this is decentralized offline access or revocation. Seems like a choose one model.
Not sure I understood that question.
So decentralized access or revocation, I'm not sure who asked that question, but if you want to pop in, we can put you live, and you can just pose the question directly if you'd like. And while we wait, I have one more question, which is there's been a lot of talk of quantum computers, the future of encryption, and there's been a lot of hype. And I'm just wondering, what are your thoughts are, say, the solution you've described versus any type of encryption and the potential for it being, useless should the day come that quantum computers are just unbelievable. What are your thoughts? What does that look like? Are we talking 10 years or 100 or 1,000?
So last summer, and my colleagues who are on the phone will attest to this, last summer, I would say my answer to that question was, we're probably 10 years away. I've actually accelerated that, and I think we're probably around 5 years away. And the reason is because we know for a fact that there are, governments out there that are devoting significant resources to solving quantum computing, right? To actually building something that does work, not just in theory and academia, but actually, from an actual functioning standpoint. So I think likely we're probably 5 years away, right? Just given the acceleration of the pace and how much people are devoting to the task. That being said, and it's absolutely true, the first thing that, a quantum computing solution will look to do is break encryption. Okay, they would likely break 128, 256-bit encryption, maybe even 512, but will they break 1028? And then if you have quantum computing, now you have the ability to use those quantum computers to generate new keys that are, a higher bit count. And in other words, you can always keep pace and be ahead of, right, whatever someone's doing to break the encryption. I'm not a believer that, because quantum computing, comes on the scene, all of a sudden the world is done, right? Because that's what would happen, right? If we would not keep pace, if we were unable to keep pace, if we were unable to up the bit, the size of the keys, we would be in trouble. And, this transcends, the commercial scope of things. Our government would be in trouble, right? There'd be no more state secrets. Nothing would be protected. Everything would have to be offline. But I think that, quantum computing would be used for good. And part of that good would be to actually create, encryption keys that are, long enough where the quantum computing, just like where we are now, is not a thing. Right. Now, if you ask our CTO that question, he's a bit more, I don't know, conservative, bullish than I am. I guess more conservative. He believes that it's a non-starter. He thinks that, and he's way smarter than me, knows cryptology way better than I do. And he's a proper computer science guy, whereas I'm just a pretender who loves it. But if you ask him that same question, he just doesn't think it's realistic. And doesn't think that, it's an issue because you can always up the bit key count.
It's too bad he's not here and we can all go out for drinks because I would love to talk about this for the next hour or so.
Oh, and he would. Yeah. He would.
Yeah, no, this is amazing. So, Dimitri, that was fantastic. Thank you so much. I'm really kind of fired up on the topic. Definitely going to run out there and get that book. So at this point, I'm going to pass the meeting back to Ed Fry, our chapter president, and we will then do a few things, and then we'll probably break and have some social time where we can all hang out for a bit. But thank you again.
Great. Thanks, everyone. My pleasure.
Ed,
all right.
take care.